Changing course. The Trump administration alters its plan for removing troops from Syria. Cabinet meeting. President Donald Trump meets with his senior staff members. We have the latest. Synod on the Amazon. Officials submit a draft of the final document on the region. We're in Rome. And an important mission. Pope Francis says there's only one requirement to be a missionary. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 21st, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. U.S. troops are on the move in Syria. President Donald Trump's plan, announced last week, pulls out roughly 1,000 Americans from the northeastern part of the country, leaving about 200 at a base in southeast Syria. Now, the defense secretary says he's talking about leaving some other troops there to fight ISIS. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason?
Wyatt, President Trump says the ceasefire is working. It was brokered by the United States government after Turkey started attacking the Kurds last week. That came after the first pullout of American troops in Syria along the Turkish border. And today, even more American troops are leaving.
Protesters in Syria try to stop American troops from leaving. But some celebration as American troops roll into Iraq. President Trump ordered them out of Syria and the border areas around Turkey.
We'll bring our soldiers back home. They were supposed to be there for 30 days, and they've been there now for 10 years in Syria. 10 years. They were supposed to go in, do a quick hit on ISIS, and come out.
U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says it'll take weeks to remove the 1,000 troops from northeast Syria.
Until that time, our forces will remain in the towns that are located near the oil fields. The purpose of those forces, working with the SDF, is to deny access to those oil fields by ISIS and others who may benefit from their revenues that could be earned.
Kurdish forces helped the U.S. fight ISIS.
Now there are thousands of ISIS prisoners who are no longer being guarded carefully by the Kurds. To say that the Turks and Syrians will guard them is awful because the Turks and Syrians don't have the same negative views of ISIS that we do.
Today, President Trump shot that down.
ISIS is being held by the Kurds, and I have an absolute commitment from Turkey that they're watching them just in case. So we have a double. We have the Kurds are watching them.
The ceasefire runs out tomorrow. It does require the Kurds to leave the area in Syria along the Turkish border. And tomorrow, right here on Capitol Hill, will be the testimony from the U.S. Special Envoy to defeat ISIS. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. President Trump defends himself during the first cabinet meeting since the impeachment investigation began on Capitol Hill. He calls the inquiry phony. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump spoke out again against the impeachment, as well as plans to host world leaders. He's now backing off a plan to host next year's G7 summit at his private resort in Miami after criticism that the president is trying to profit off the presidency. But when it comes to impeachment, President Trump is not backing down.
So there's a phony investigation.
In an extended White House meeting with cabinet staff, President Trump went on the offensive about the impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill.
It's a very bad thing what they're doing. The President of the United States should be allowed to run the country, not have to focus on this kind of crap.
He's critical of the anonymous whistleblower who tipped off Congress and the leader of the investigation, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff.
So was there actually an informant? Maybe the informant was Schiff. It could be Shifty Schiff. In my opinion, it's possibly Schiff.
On another topic, President Trump says he was forced to move next year's Group of Seven summit from his private golf club in Florida after bipartisan criticism that he was trying to profit off the presidency.
It would have been great, but the Democrats went crazy. Even though I would have done it free, saved the country a lot of money. Then they say, oh, but you'll get promotion. Who cares? You don't think I get enough promotion? I get more promotion than any human being that's ever lived.
And amid an ongoing trade war with China, President Trump claims it's paying off for the U.S. and hurting the communist country.
China is doing very poorly. Worst year they've had in 57 years. I wonder why.
During today's cabinet meeting, the president also took a swipe at Hillary Clinton for suggesting presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian agent. The president said Clinton and other Democrats say anybody opposed to them is a Russian agent. And the president adds, these people are sick. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Joining me now with her analysis is Mary Walter, co-host of Mornings on the Mall on WMAL Radio. Mary, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
As we just heard from Mark, President Trump came out swinging against the Democrats' impeachment inquiry. What are your thoughts on just how this whole inquiry has been conducted so far?
Well, it's not really an impeachment inquiry. I mean, it's not an impeachment inquiry done the way it's ever been done before. And this is being done in secret, and people should be really concerned about this because the people who are being called to testify aren't allowed to have lawyers present. I mean, can you imagine? You're not allowed to have any kind of guidance with you when you're in there because you're just supposed to be answering these questions, and it's done behind closed doors, and things are being leaked out selectively. You know, so whenever I hear there's a leak, I'm like, oh, because it's something against the president. Every now and then we'll get one that is favorable to the president. You'll get a leak out. But the fact that this is being done behind closed doors, this should be in front of the American people. We should know what's going on. We should be able to hear these testimonies, and we can judge for ourselves.
To that end, Republicans are planning to try to force a vote on the House floor on a resolution to censure House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff, accusing him of conveying false retelling of the phone conversation between President Trump and the Ukrainian president. First off, do you think that'll actually happen? Will that be successful? And what impact, if anything, that will have?
Well, I think it's going to happen. I think it will happen. I think it has to happen because I personally believe Adam Schiff's out of control, and he is orchestrating this entire thing. Impeachment is a power given to the House. It's not a power given to Nancy Pelosi, and it's certainly not a power given to Adam Schiff. It is a power given to the House. The House is not participating in this. Republicans aren't allowed to even question any of these people who are testifying. So this is a power that Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi are taking on themselves. Adam Schiff needs to be rebuked. Do I think anything will come of it? Probably not. What's it going to do? It's just a censure. So what's it really going to do? It is symbolic, but impeachment's symbolic too. It's a political process. It's not a legal process. And I'm actually glad to see the Republicans finally doing something, because for so often they just sit back and they're reactive instead of proactive. So I'm glad to see them starting to fight back a little bit. It makes me happy.
Switching gears a little bit, because we had earlier talking about Syria, we've seen some within the Republican Party speak out against the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. Today, we're hearing some of those troops could stay. What does that signal to you? And do you think any of this could be because of some Republican pushback against the Trump administration?
You know, I don't know that. I don't know. I don't think any of us really know why this is slowly shifting. I think the whole Middle East, Syria, that whole area is so shifting all the time, and there are so many players, and these divisions go back thousands of years, and trying to solve it, America trying to solve it, I think that's something that we've done very foolishly in the past. We're like, oh well, these people want democracy. Never had democracy. They don't really want democracy. They want their way of life, and because they're so tribal, I think that the fighting goes on for a really, really long time, and the president promised to bring our troops home. And that's what he keeps saying. I promise to bring my troops home. That's what he's doing. But I feel so bad for the Kurdish people. You know, my heart goes out to the Kurdish people because they're going to be slaughtered, and I feel terribly about that. So I don't know what the answer to this is. Far smarter people than I have to make that decision.
And one thing's for sure, none of it will be solved anytime soon, so we'll continue to follow the situation. Mary Walter, co-host of WMAL's Mornings on the Mall, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Lawmakers in the United Kingdom say they will not vote again on whether to approve the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union. In a rare Saturday session this past weekend, Parliament voted to delay Brexit for 3 months. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was seeking a second vote to try and ensure the exit would happen by October 31st. Johnson and European leaders reached a preliminary agreement late last week, but it needs the approval of UK lawmakers. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has lost his bid to delay a court proceeding about his extradition to the United States. Assange arrived to a London court in a van earlier today. His legal team was hoping for more time to prepare for his case. The 48-year-old is accused of scheming with a former Army intelligence analyst to break a password for a classified government computer. His lawyers say it is an unprecedented use of espionage charges against a journalist. Laws banning abortion and same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland are set to change. Abortion will be decriminalized in the country tonight at midnight. Same-sex marriage could become legal by January. Northern Ireland's government has been suspended for more than 2.5 years amid a dispute between the major Protestant and Catholic parties. More violence breaks out in Hong Kong over the weekend. Police used water cannons to disperse a pro-democracy rally last night. They also fired tear gas. At least a dozen were injured. On Saturday, protesters held a prayer rally. They were also asking for help from the international community. The former British territory has seen several months of pro-democracy demonstrations. Survivors of clergy sexual abuse in Guam are set to receive payments starting early next year. The Archdiocese of Agana still is calculating what it owes to the more than 250 victims. The survivors and church officials will meet by the end of the month to finalize the payments. The Archdiocese filed for bankruptcy last year. The Synod on the Amazon enters its last week as bishops meeting in Rome discuss a final document for Pope Francis to consider. They'll vote on the document this weekend, but before they do, participants will be working in groups this week discussing its content. Cardinal Peter Turkson is head of the Vatican's Department for Promoting Integral Human Development. He's also taking part in the Synod. He joins us now from Rome. Your Eminence, thank you so much for joining us. You and the bishops have been working for 2 weeks. In your view, what are the big issues that have risen to the top?
I think the real issues are precisely those issues that made the Pope convene this synod in the first place. It is care and concern for what the Pope had written about earlier on in his encyclical Laudato Si, about the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. The earth in this case is all of the planet, represented in this case by what is happening in the Amazon. And the cry of the poor in this case is again the poor all over the world, but represented again by the indigenous population, people of African descent, and all of those groups living in the Amazon. So these are the two crucial issues, and the urgency of their cries is what has brought us here. So to put it then, we're trying to listen to and respond to the two cries of the earth and the poor in the Amazon, and then look at the church's own part of this. So the church's pastoral care, how it's been done, how effectively and sufficiently this has been, and the need to look at new ways of doing this in a way that is coherent, consistent, and then lasting, if you want.
As you know, some bishops have expressed support for ordaining married men in the Amazon due to a shortage of priests there, a lack of access to the sacraments in some parts of the region. What's your view on all this? Do you think that's necessary?
This, I think, the thing I think to do is that we're looking at the Amazon and its challenges. They're similar to several challenges elsewhere. So this issue may probably be made the subject matter of a more detailed study of the issue with view to the church taking a consistent position, not only in view of the Amazon, but in view of the universal church.
Your Eminence, earlier you had mentioned how the church in Africa and the church in India has lessons that perhaps the Amazon can learn from. I know you yourself are originally from Ghana, and you know the church in Africa is growing faster than anywhere else in the world. What lessons can the church take from Africa and apply to the Amazon?
Now, the lessons that the Amazon may run in Africa, because the situations in the Amazon are pretty similar to those in the Congo. In both cases, accessibility is very difficult and reduced. Communication is tough. And if you want to get to places, either by road or by river or whatever type of, those challenges are there. So in the case of Africa over the years, what has been done is to encourage in every local community, call them small Christian communities or whatever, but the catechists who were considered to be the head of the community and group, having the right and the power to administer the community capably, preaching the word of God, baptizing sometimes, burying, and sometimes even officiating as some marriages, and constituted extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist. That's something that is being done. But in that case, the guys in the Synod here are listening to that, And they say that is fine, but they can still not celebrate the Eucharist. And that's what we want. We want guys and people who can still celebrate the Eucharist so that they're not just extraordinary Eucharistic ministers, and that will suppose that the Eucharist is already there for them to distribute. They're looking for somebody who can, like anoint the sick, listen to confessions, celebrate the Eucharist with people, and that of course required ordained ministry, for which the examples in Africa then come short, or they fall short of that.
Well, they are crucial issues and ones that we'll continue to follow, and obviously all the details that come out of the Synod. Cardinal Peter Turkson, Prefect for the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, thank you so much. Coming up, analysis of a new Trump administration initiative regarding asylum seekers. The Trump administration is planning to collect DNA samples from asylum seekers and other migrants detained by immigration officials. According to the Associated Press, that includes almost all migrants who cross between official entry points and even those who are held temporarily. The Justice Department says it will add the information to an FBI database used by law enforcement searching for criminals. Joining me now to offer his feedback is Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Alfonso, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Right now, migrants who cross the border illegally are fingerprinted. Those fingerprints are in federal databases. We're used to that, used in state and local law enforcement. What do you think about this step by the administration, this extra step?
I think it makes sense. As you say, we are already taking down biometric information. We are using DNA for some immigrants that are charged with criminal offenses. I think this is a great tool to identify criminals, but also to ensure that when adults come with minors, that those minors are actually related to them, they're their children, because there is a lot of trafficking of children for the sex trafficking market. And so this is something that can actually help us deal with that. It's not going to be, as you said, there's already a DNA database that's being used by the FBI. It's also used at times with U.S. citizens. So I think this makes perfect sense. I don't think anybody's saying that the majority of those arriving at our ports of entry, the immigrants arriving at our ports of entry, are criminals, but there are some that are involved in criminal activity, as I've said, sex trafficking, trafficking with minors, and this is another tool that can be very, very helpful. It doesn't mean, and I'm sure the ACLU is complaining because it has to do with violating civil liberties, this is not going to lead to persecuting immigrants throughout the country. As it is, Homeland Security has a lot of work to do, and they're not going to be able to go around, just monitoring the movements of any immigrant. This is really to go after criminals.
Well, you mentioned the ACLU, who is raising the privacy concerns, as you mentioned. I think they're more concerned about this moving from criminal investigation into full-on population surveillance, and whether or not the government is getting too big to collect all of this.
But that's what I'm saying, that is so absurd. Homeland Security wants to go after the criminals. The idea, they don't have the manpower to conduct population surveillance. So this is a tool that can help identify criminals that are detained, can help identify, as I've said, adults that come with minors that are not their children, that are being trafficked. So this is a good tool. But to suggest that this is somehow going to lead to population surveillance, that's a stretch.
So you don't think this is a slippery slope?
No, not at all. This is the typical exaggeration from the ACLU.
Okay. Going back to your earlier point, because you were answering a little bit of this, but let's go back a little bit further. What impact do you think this will have on the administration's efforts to address illegal immigration? In other words, how does this sort of play into their proposal, how they think about handling illegal immigration? And do you think ultimately this will help stop at least some criminal activity?
Well, this certainly I hope that it would help dissuade some people who are trafficking children from, hopefully they'll think twice before trafficking children through the southern border. If they know that DNA is going to be taken and that it's going to be easier for federal authorities to identify those children who are not coming with parents or relatives that are being trafficked, then hopefully that will dissuade traffickers. So I think it's an incredible measure to ensure that traffickers don't try to bring children through our southern border. So it has to be part of our border security strategy. And I think, as I've said, is very effective.
Okay, we'll be watching to see how it all plays out and kind of the next steps in terms of the Trump administration's ability to handle illegal immigration and to process them. Alfonso Aguilar, President of Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, Pope Francis makes a call to all people who have been baptized. Plus a report from Rome as controversial indigenous statues are stolen from a church.
La preghiera è il primo sostegno del popolo di Dio per I missionari.
Pope Francis says every baptized person is called to be a missionary. At his Sunday prayers with pilgrims, the Holy Father said we all share the responsibility to proclaim the kingdom of God. Doing so is simple. All it requires is to pray often and never give up. The Holy Father's meeting on the Amazon has taken a criminal twist. This video emerged this morning showing two men stealing indigenous fertility statues from a church near the Vatican and tossing them into the Tiber River. EWTN contributor Colin Flynn has more from Rome. Colin?
Good evening, Wyatt. We first saw this statue during a prayer service in the Vatican Gardens at the beginning of the month to mark the opening of the Synod. The statues had been brought to the Vatican by indigenous leaders from the Amazon region, which of course is the focus of this Synod. It set off a debate over why the figure, which appears to be a pagan fertility icon, was being used in a Catholic context. There was a strong negative reaction from some Catholics around the world. And at first, defenders said it was an image of the Virgin Mary. But a Vatican spokesperson said the statue represents life and was neither pagan nor sacred. Well, today, this story took a bizarre turn. This video was posted online. It shows two men entering a church near the Vatican just before dawn. One enters the side altars and gathers up 5 of the statues and carries them out of the church. They proceed a short distance down the street to Castel Sant'Angelo, where one by one they knocked the statues off the bridge and into the Tiber River. Well, the video has been viewed almost 40,000 times online, with many viewers calling the men heroes. The Vatican called it a stunt and said that it violated the idea of dialogue. It's unknown who the two men involved are or where they're from, but the church in question, which is just next to the Vatican, has contacted the police and an investigation has begun. This latest news, although an isolated incident, is an example of the kind of tension that has surrounded the Synod from the very beginning. Pope Francis called this meeting to look at ways to better serve the indigenous people of the Amazon, who face poverty, exploitation, and the destruction of their homes. But for many Catholics, they see this meeting as an effort by progressives to change centuries of Catholic tradition, like pre-celibacy. The Synod ends this weekend when bishops will vote on a final document which will make recommendations for Pope Francis to consider. It's up to Pope Francis then whether to make those proposals a reality. In Rome, Colin Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
And our thanks to Colin for that report. Finally tonight, the Vatican unveils a new way to pray the Rosary. You could say with this method, it's all in the wrist.
Está en su corazón, pero pienso que reza más eso que eso. Pero esto es más bien para los jóvenes.
The Holy See unveiled a new app-driven e-rosary. It hopes it will appeal to a younger audience. It fits around one's wrists and is activated by making the sign of the cross. Among other functions, it keeps track of how many prayers users say each day and sends out prayer reminders. It also works as a health monitor. Hopefully it will help some people to come closer to Christ through the intercession of Mary. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.